everyone. Good afternoon, good evening almost. Thank you for being here. So happy to be here with you. There's so many of us. Thank you for coming. I'm very glad you're here. And as Tricia said, we're going to do it a little bit different. We're going to do the cooking first. So if you get here on time, you'll get to taste the recipes. If you get here late, you probably won't. You might miss it. Or maybe not. You might still be able to catch it. And we're going to do one recipe. So you're going to have a few recipes every week, but I'm going to demonstrate one of them. So to kind of make it shorter, but I'll explain to you the other recipe as well. And if you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand and ask questions. And so we're going to be trying to focus on different types of foods every week so that you hopefully get a variety of different dishes that you can prepare at home. And then during the actual theory or lecture part, then you'll find out why these types of food are actually so helpful and so beneficial for our health and for reversing type 2 diabetes, which is possible. And also pre-diabetes and also insulin resistance. We're going to talk about all of that during this program. So I hope you're here for every session. So I'm going to start with the cooking. If everything works, hopefully we'll have everything. There we go. I'm going to first demonstrate the Cuban-style black beans. So that's going to be on your second page. Cuban-style black beans, second page. And let me tell you what, this is my favorite way to prepare black beans. So this is my number one when it comes to black beans. Of course, I like beans of every color, honestly. But for black beans, it just turned out to be our favorite at home. So we always make it. And it's very, very easy. Now, as far as the beans themselves, you can cook them yourself, which I highly recommend because that way it's way cheaper. You save a lot of money if you cook your own beans. I have become quite the fan of something called the Instant Pot. Has anybody ever heard of an Instant Pot? It's a pressure cooker, but it's electrical. So you plug it in, and it saves so much time. I don't soak my beans ahead of time. I just put them in there with enough water. You have to figure out, they'll probably get that online or somewhere. But if you ask me, I'll tell you. I usually put 2 cups of beans for 6.5 cups of water. And then a little bit of salt if you want. And then cook for 45 minutes. And then you have your beans. So it's really easy that way. I cook a big batch and then I have it for a few days at home. And then I don't have to cook every day because I have some stuff cooked already. Saves time that way. If you don't have the time or if you prefer to buy canned beans, I recommend getting the low sodium variety because regular beans usually have way too much sodium. So we're going to have the cooked beans already cooked. Don't put your raw beans in here. That's not going to work. So what you'll notice also is that I'm going to use, in the recipe, I try to use either water or vegetable broth to saute. And I'll explain all of that as we go through the program. Why am I not using something like olive oil? And you'll find out, especially next week, you'll find out a lot more about that. But I'm using vegetable broth because it gives the food a little bit additional flavor, but you can use water as well. And in this case, I'm actually using a product called Better Than Bouillon. I don't know if you've seen it at the store. It's like a paste, and you dissolve it in water. And I use the vegetable kind, so not the chicken or beef or anything. And so then I'm going to just go ahead and add the vegetables. I already have them all in the same container. So I have some bell pepper, some onion, and some garlic already pre-cut. And you just chop it fine. That way it cooks faster. And so I'm just going to go ahead and dump it all in. And so we let these veggies cook for maybe about 3 minutes or so until they get nice and tender. Just gonna, if you start stir frying your veggies and they get a little dry, just add more liquid, that's all. And it's usually faster, right? When we talking about that, it's usually faster this way than adding oil. But I'm going to go ahead and add some herbs as well. I have oregano that I actually grow in my house. So I like it because it's very fresh. And I like oregano. It gives it a distinct flavor. But you can use other things. You can use thyme or marjoram or other things. But in order to really give it the authentic taste, I think the combination of the oregano and cumin really does it. And of course, with this one, you have to be careful because putting too much of this can really make a difference. It can make it too hard to remove later. You won't be able to. So with this, you really, really want to measure. I recommend measuring the cumin. Now, I've already made this recipe like 100 million times, so I'm not going to measure, which goes against what I just said, right? I said always measure it. I'm not going to measure it because I've done it so many times that I can kind of tell, how much. And so I usually put about either a quarter or a half of a teaspoon. Now, if you like the taste of cumin, go ahead and put more. I like my food not to be super strong tasting. So then, once these veggies are nice and tender, usually you will tell because the onions are translucent, then you can go ahead and add your beans. And so these beans already have some liquid. You might need to add more. And so I leave it up to you how thick you want this stew, or how dry, or how wet, it's up to you how much liquid you add. But you probably need to add a little bit of liquid if your beans were drained, because you'll need a little bit of water. So we're just gonna mix it up like this. And the last thing I'll add is bay leaf. Love the taste of bay leaf on legumes. Legumes really get a good taste when you add one or two at the most. That's all you probably need. You put that in there. And then you will let this cook for maybe once it boils, maybe you want to go another 5 to 10 minutes. It's really all you will need. You don't need to cook a lot because your veggies will be already cooked and your beans are already cooked. That's the important thing. Don't put your dry beans in here. And that's it. You let the flavors mix a little bit and your beans are done. And you can make a big batch if you'd like. You can serve it with rice. I usually use brown rice. You can serve it with other grains, maybe quinoa. You can serve it with some maybe whole grain tortillas, if you'd like. Salad, I would definitely add some vegetables somewhere there in your meal. And you got a full meal if you have your vegetables and your salad and your carbohydrate, which could be your rice or a tortilla or something like that. And then this will provide some good quality vegetable protein. And we'll talk about the importance of good quality vegetable protein as we go on in this program. So vegetable protein is just as good as any other protein because proteins are made of amino acids. So as long as you get your amino acids, you'll have protein. But the benefit of having legumes, and you'll see there's a tip right here, like a box under the recipe. It says high fiber protein tip. And if you read that, it will talk about how important it is to introduce fiber into our recipe. Fiber is the one nutrient that we are actually pretty much all of us deficient in. Most people think we need more protein, and actually what we need more of is fiber. So when people ask you, where do you get your protein, you can ask them back, where do you get your fiber? And that way they'll probably won't know what to say. So anyway, I'll talk about a lot more about this when we talk about the nutrition aspect of diabetes. Now, let me go back to the first page. Oh, by the way, does anyone have a question? Yes.
How many servings does it usually make in the Instant Pot?
Oh, of the beans? Well, I've never counted the servings. I make 2 cups, and I get a real big amount of beans. Yeah, maybe about 8 cups of beans, at least 6 cups of beans, maybe 8 cups of beans, cooked.
And if you use the 4 to 5 cups of beans, how long do you cook them in the Instant Pot?
I cook them for 45 minutes, no matter what the amount. Yeah, always 45 minutes. 45 minutes, just, except for lentils. Lentils are faster to cook, so they take, depends on the kind of lentils. Some lentils are smaller and some are bigger. The brown lentils usually take about 10 minutes, 15 at the most. Maybe not even 15 minutes. I'd say 10 to 12 minutes for lentils. Yes? So you add salt to taste? I think the ladies added a little bit of salt. And yeah. Oh, is it? Okay, good. If anybody needs more salt, let us know, because we don't usually put a lot of salt in the cooking. And we try to, keep the sodium down. So if you happen to need more salt, we might be able to get that for you. But I try to recommend low sodium if possible. So good question. Thank you for that. Any other question about this recipe?
I use Himalayan salt in that, very little.
There's your answer there. Himalayan salt, a little bit. Yeah, so definitely my recommendation is to not put too much salt on the food. Yes, very good. Any other questions about the beans? Any other questions about the beans? Okay, so let me go back to the first page, and you see a waffle recipe. And so the focus for this week today is high fiber protein. So the mystery ingredient in these waffles is actually you can either use soaked soybeans, or you can use garbanzos or some other bean into your waffles. Now, speaking of soybeans, a lot of people have a lot of concerns about soybeans. It just so happens that since the last time you guys were here, because some of you have been here before, since the last time we saw each other, there's been so much more research on soybeans. First of all, there's an amazing meta-analysis. That means, a compilation of lots of different studies. About 400 studies were done and were released, a study this year on all the different myths on soy, and all of them were debunked. So eating soy foods does not alter your hormones, either male or female hormones. It does not cause cancer, neither for females, breast cancer, or males, prostate cancer. In fact, the opposite is actually the truth. We have found through research that females who consume soy foods have less risk for cancer, breast cancer in particular, but also ovarian cancer and other hormone-related cancers. But also, if you have had cancer, it lowers your chances of getting it again. And for men, your chances of prostate cancers go down dramatically as well. So cancer goes down, and the hormones is not a problem. Even thyroid has been found that is not at all a problem. It doesn't affect your thyroid. So if you want to know more about that, you can definitely contact me, and I'll give you the reference for that study. And the other thing that has been found about soybeans is the following. For women who are going through menopause, they did a study, and they found that the best way to get rid of hot flashes is to consume half a cup of cooked soybeans every day. I've been doing it. I'm almost 50. So I've been doing it. Half a cup of cooked, so you cook the soybeans, but it's a little different on the Instant Pot. I tried cooking it this exact same way, but you have to soak them overnight. So that soybeans are different from other beans. So they absorb more water, you have to put more water. I still haven't quite figured out how to cook them on the Instant Pot, but I'm working on it. But anyway, half a cup of soybeans will absolutely help women going through menopause, and in many cases, it reduces hot flashes by 84%. If you want to know the exact amount, 84%. Anyway, you can use the soybeans for this recipe, or you can use, I recommend garbanzo beans as the second choice. You can use white beans, pinto beans, black beans, whatever bean. The thing is, when you add these beans to the waffles, it adds that extra fiber. And that's what we're really, really emphasizing. Especially, you'll find out why next week, but fibers help to reduce glucose in the blood. It actually also helps to reduce cholesterol in the blood. And it also helps to reduce extra hormones that people may have, whether male or female hormones. It helps to reduce those hormones. So both in the female and male versions of the hormones, we can have them in excess for different reasons. And extra fiber helps to get rid of those. Basically, you get rid of them. You get rid of them. So that's why I recommend that. So you take all of these ingredients that are listed here, 1 cup of soaked soybeans or another legume, and the water, a sweetener, some kind of sweetener, or you can leave it out if you like. The walnuts are a little bit of that healthy fat, some vanilla if you like, salt if you like, and some oats, which also add some really good quality fiber. You blend all that, put it in your, hopefully you have a waffle maker. If you want to make waffles, you'll need a waffle maker. You put it in your waffle maker, and then cook the batter just like you would any other waffle mix. That's it. And then you serve it with the topping. And the topping, as you see, there's only 2 ingredients. It's basically strawberries and some kind of sweetener. I like to use stevia, but you can use maybe dates if you like dates, maple syrup or something like that, or leave it off completely. You blend half of the strawberries, and then you add the other the rest of the strawberries that have been cut up, and you mix those 2 things, the blended strawberries and the chunks, and then the sweetener. That's it. It's really simple. Monk fruit, that's a really good comment. Thank you for that. Monk fruit is a really good version, or another option. You can, I think you can. I've never tried necessarily, but I think people have tried. So the only thing is that you have to, make sure they're cooked all the way in. That's the only thing. So that's it for our recipes. If anybody else has a question. No more questions. Perfect. So we're going, yes, go ahead.
You say soybeans. What about the other products that they make out of soybeans?
Oh, good question. Yes, good question. Soy patties, soy sausage. It might not, because they're highly processed. So some of these products that are made out of soy are much more processed, but some of them are less processed. So soy milk, for instance, is much less processed, and tofu is made out of soy milk, and tofu is a less processed product. Whereas if you want to buy, soy burgers or something, that might be much more processed. So it depends on how they made it. So I recommend the less processed foods. They usually have less sodium too. Highly processed foods have a lot of sodium. So that's a great question.
Where do you
I buy them at Staff of Life. Well, there's one here in Watsonville now. So Staff of Life is a good place to get things like that. Or I order them online, and they come in the mail.
So do they look like beans?
Yeah, they're nice and round. They're tiny things, and when you soak them up, they get bigger. Yeah. So for the batter tonight, it was garbanzo beans in the mix. So FYI. You're like, you couldn't tell. You liked it. Great. So we're going to go ahead. Oops, I forgot to use my gloves. Sorry about that. Okay, I'm going to turn on the projector. While, in the meantime, I'm going to ask you to please fill out the program evaluation. It's a pre-evaluation, and this will really, really, really help us. If you can please fill this out. It's 10 questions. It's very simple. Trisha, do we have pens for people? Yeah, so somebody needs a pen over here. So this will help us a lot to make the program better. We want to know before and after, so we'll ask you to fill it out at the end again. It's only 10 questions though. So if you can please fill this out right now, and then we will collect these at the end probably. And we won't share any information or anything like that. It's just for our own purposes to make this program better. So again, it's the program pre-evaluation. There's 10 questions. So if you can please fill this out right now, we would really, really appreciate it. Thank you.
I have a question.
Yes.
a waffle, could we make it like, turn it into a pancake or work as a pancake?
Yeah, he had asked that, and I don't know for sure because I've never tried it myself. I just use my waffle maker. It seems easier for me, but I would try it on a non-stick griddle or something, and just make sure it's thin enough so that you can cook it well on both sides. So thank you so much for doing that. I really appreciate it. So we're going to be talking about mostly diabetes type 2 in this program, preventing and improving diabetes. But we're also this also applies for pre-diabetes. And as you probably know, pre-diabetes is way more common than diagnosed type 2 diabetes. We're also going to be talking about, misspelled right there, insulin resistance. But before I get started, I just want to let you know that this is an educational program. It's not meant to be a treatment, but we will talk about things that you could do to improve your health. If you do have diabetes, type 2 or even type 1, and if you make changes, if you're taking medication, I would highly recommend, I would definitely recommend that you do that under the supervision of your physician, because some of these things we're going to be talking about are so effective that you will probably need to change the dose of any medication you're taking. Even for blood pressure, if you take blood pressure medication, you might need to start changing the dose of that if you follow the program the way we're going to show it during the following sessions, okay? So that's something that I highly recommend, that we do not consider this to be a treatment for you. You have to consult your medical provider, okay? All right. So let me tell you a little bit about why I talk about diabetes, why I like diabetes so much. This is a picture of Salud para la Gente, how it used to look when I used to work there, because now they've remodeled, as you probably know, Salud para la Gente right here in Watsonville. I used to work there many, many years as a nutritionist, and I got to actually work with mostly diabetics. Some of them gestational diabetes, so women who were pregnant, who had diabetes during pregnancy, but also type 2 diabetes for the most part, which is mostly found in adults, but nowadays I saw some children. Right here in Watsonville, we have children who have type 2 diabetes, which used to be called adult onset diabetes. No longer is that term used because it's no longer adult onset. Sometimes we have children as young as 10 or 12 years old that develop type 2 diabetes. So this is where my experience with diabetes started. And as Tricia said, we've been doing this program. Here's a previous version of this program a few years ago. We've been doing this. We used to do it twice a year, but then I got way too busy and I couldn't do that anymore, and couldn't fit in my schedule. So we do it once a year, and we try to do it every year, of course, as a program for the community, as an educational program for the community. And thank you again for being here. I also got, many years ago, maybe about 6 years ago, I got the chance to travel to Honduras. And the man you see on the screen right here, his name is Milton Teskey, and he's a physician right here from California, an expert in diabetes and reversing diabetes. In fact, he worked for many years doing weekend programs to reverse diabetes. And when we went to Honduras, that's what we did. We did a 6-day program in Honduras, a little village in the middle of nowhere in Honduras, to reverse diabetes and lower, blood pressure and cholesterol, that kind of thing. And I got to translate the medical presentations because he presented the medical, very technical aspect of diabetes, and I presented the nutrition aspect of diabetes. And then we got to work with these wonderful people from this village, like I said, a very tiny village. They didn't have one paved road, not even a grocery store. I mean, this is a tiny village. And I thought for sure in the middle of nowhere in Honduras that people would be way healthier, that people would not have things such as diabetes and high cholesterol, high blood pressure. And boy, was I wrong. When I got to, Honduras, I realized people were just as sick. And I was wondering why. If you think people live in the country, they probably eat better. But people were, when I asked this question, people were like, oh, no, go check what they sell in the little corner stores. They didn't have no stores in this little village, no grocery stores, but they had homes that were in corners converted into tiny stores where people would buy through the window. And I went to check out what they sold. And sure enough, you see all the junk food we have, so you may basically, chips, sodas, cookies, that same kind of stuff, lots of fried foods and, little, fried things, a lot of those things. And of course, juices and sodas and things and candies. And so no wonder people are sick everywhere because unfortunately, this kind of food is a global phenomenon. And so we taught them not only how to exercise, as you can see here, they were exercising maybe for the first time in years. We also fed them for 6 days straight, a very healthy diet. And we did some, in fact, this lady here, she's also a nutritionist, and she was in charge of doing the cooking demonstrations. And before we traveled to Honduras, she called me up and said, can you take some cookbooks? Because I had some cookbooks. And she's like, can you take some of your cookbooks so we can, do recipes over there? And I'm going to take mine. So we both took, a bunch of cookbooks. And none of them were of any use for us in Honduras. Because let me tell you, right here, there's no stores. There's no grocery stores. There's no Staff of Life or anything even close to that. And in fact, where we were staying, this campus right here, they had no electricity. They had no refrigerator. They put everything in a dark room so that the things wouldn't spoil. So, the fruits and the vegetables and things like that, everything was stored in a dark room that was cooler than the rest. Everything else was really hot. And so, and you cooked sometimes even like fire. Sometimes they didn't even use a regular stove. I mean, it was pretty primitive. Now they've had a little bit, I think they have like some solar panels, so they have a little bit of electricity. I've gone there back five times, so I've, kind of been keeping up with them. But the point is, they didn't have any of the ingredients we thought we would need, but she was still able to make very simple and very healthy foods using the simple foods they had, mostly corn, beans, lentils, rice, vegetables, fruits, things like that. You don't need fancy food to be healthy. That's the point that I really wanted to make. You could make foods that are actually very affordable with very simple ingredients. So don't have to be very fancy or anything like that. Okay? So that's kind of what the experience that I've had over the years with diabetes. And of course, I've written a book in Spanish because this program is done in English, but we don't really have a way to do it in Spanish yet. But there's a book that I wrote with the information, and I also have an online class in Spanish so that people who want to get the information in Spanish is available. Now, when I start this conversation, I always ask people, what is diabetes? And people have all kinds of different definitions of what diabetes is. So most people, raise their hand and they're like, too much sugar in the blood. Would anybody agree with that? That diabetes means that you have too much sugar in the blood? Anybody? Would anybody agree with that? Yeah? Okay. What about this? Your pancreas doesn't work anymore. Yeah, see? You don't have enough insulin. Yeah, see? All right. So a lot of these things are very, very true, but we'll learn actually why that happens and the cause of that. Now, this program is mostly going to be about type 2 diabetes, but you probably know that there's a type 1 diabetes, and this is an autoimmune disease. Only about 5 to maybe at most 10% of diabetics have type 1, but it does exist. It's different cause, but let me tell you what, some people with type 1 diabetes also do benefit from a program like this, because many people who have type 1 diabetes also have insulin resistance. Some experts call that double diabetes. Double diabetes means you have type 1, but you also have insulin resistance, which is the cause of type 2, and you need to get rid of the insulin resistance in order to be able to bring down the amount of insulin you need. Some people have it type 1 and keep increasing the amounts of insulin they need month after month, year after year, and they end up using a lot of insulin, which actually is not good for our health. And their health is actually damaged by excess insulin because they're not able to control their blood sugar. And of course, we know that this type of insulin sometimes starts with children. It used to be called juvenile. No longer is that used either because now children have type 2, so it's too confusing. So we use type 1 and type 2.
There's also type 1.5.
I was going to mention that coming up. it's coming up. But let me just tell you that the type 1 means the cells that make insulin. These are the cells that make insulin. This is what they would, of course, this is just an illustration. But if they're healthy, they make insulin. These are cells in your pancreas. When they're not healthy anymore, and they're destroyed actually by your own immune system, they no longer make insulin, so you have to get insulin. In the case of type 1, you have to. But not so with type 2. In many cases, people don't need insulin because they still produce it. It's just not working properly, and we're going to talk about why that happens. Some women get gestational diabetes, and I did treat a lot of ladies with gestational diabetes. It's a hormonal problem that actually has to do with the pregnancy itself, but there's also some lifestyle issues as well. So actually, gestational diabetes is reversible. So women who have it don't have to have it if they follow the right lifestyle and diet. And the other thing about gestational diabetes is that about 50% of women who have had gestational diabetes during pregnancy, which, by the way, once you have the baby, it disappears, it goes away. But 50% of those women actually get type 2 diabetes. And with Hispanic women, that happens in the next 5 years. So 50% of Hispanic women get type 2 diabetes 5 years after having their baby, or within the 5 years after having a baby. Type 1.5, that was mentioned, is latent autoimmune diabetes in adults, or LADA. Has anybody ever heard of this, other than Carol? I know Carol has heard about it. Anybody else have ever heard of type 1.5? You have, okay. Oh, that's different, it's coming up. Yeah, that's different, it's coming up. So type 1.5, it's kind of in between type 1 and type 2. So it has an autoimmune component. So definitely there is a kind of like destruction of your beta cells that I just showed before. These cells right here, they're compromised. So you stop, but it's very gradual. The change can take years, and it usually is found in adults instead of children. And there is probably also a component that's lifestyle related. So it has the fact that it happens in adulthood, and it's an autoimmune disorder. So it's kind of in between. That's why it's called 1.5. So it's a latent autoimmune diabetes in adult. Many people with type 2 actually are misdiagnosed and might have type 1.5 instead. So it's good to know that this is the case. And you might, if lifestyle changes don't work at all, it might be because it's a 1.5 instead of type 2. Type 3, has anyone heard of type 3? Oh, did you have a question?
Is that the only way you know that you have it?
No, you need to be diagnosed because you would have some antibodies. With a medical doctor would have to probably diagnose your, first of all, how much insulin you're producing, and second of all, if you have the antibodies, because it's an autoimmune. I'm not sure if it's I think it is a blood test, but I can look it up for you and find out. C-peptide, so C-peptide will let you know if you're producing enough insulin. And then you have to get diagnosed with the antibodies as well. So if you've had an autoimmune reaction. So your doctor would know better, best how to do that. But that's a great question. Okay, anybody has ever heard of type 3 diabetes? The same two, you guys are really knowledgeable. Type 3 diabetes is a thing. And you know what the other name for this disease is? You probably all know it. Exactly. Alzheimer's disease is type 3 diabetes. We have found now, especially lately, that there's insulin resistance in the brain of individuals who have Alzheimer's disease. So this is, you see how a lot of things are connected here? You'll find out more during this lecture how a lot of these things are actually connected. It's almost like they have the same root cause. Now let me show you this study that talks about Alzheimer's disease is type 3 diabetes. Evidence reviewed, talks about insulin resistance, brain insulin resistance. So in case you want to know more information, but it is a thing. Now that's what we know about Alzheimer's disease. It's actually lifestyle. This is very much related to lifestyle. We thought it was genes, but then they started to do some of the genetic tests with people who had the genes that were supposed to give them the Alzheimer's and never really developed it. So it wasn't so much the genes. It seems like the genes puts you maybe at a risk for it, but it's not what causes the Alzheimer's disease. So it's lifestyle related, just like type 2. All right, so today we're going to talk about this very, very important topic because this will set the foundation for everything else we're going to be talking in the next few sessions. And we're going to talk about the root cause of diabetes. And the reason why we're going to talk about the root cause is because if we want to reverse diabetes, type 2 and prediabetes, and the cause of it, we need to know what it is so that we can remove it. It's kind of like a cause-effect type of thing. It's a cause and effect relationship. Once we know what the cause is, and if we remove the cause, our likelihood of being able to reverse type 2 diabetes is between 85 and maybe even more than 90%. And so we've seen that through data, people who have type 2 diabetes and actually engage in all the different lifestyle changes we will be talking about, up to 90-some% are actually able to reverse it. And we're going to talk about what actually does it mean to reverse diabetes. What does that mean? Does that mean that I still use medications? Or what are my, A1C numbers? What's my glucose numbers? What does it mean? We're going to talk about it. I'll show you. But first of all, I just want to kind of establish some facts about glucose. When we eat food, so right now you have beans and you had, waffles, some of those foods, of course, have a lot of carbohydrates. And so these carbohydrates, once digested, they become that very famous sugar that's called glucose. Anybody ever heard of glucose before? All of you guys. Because glucose is basically the fuel for our cells. So that's why when we digest carbohydrates, they then are broken down into this sugar called glucose. Now, glucose is not bad per se. We need glucose. If you didn't have it, you would die. We need it for our body functions. We need it for our muscles and for other cells in our bodies. But here's a very simple representation of a cell. And here comes glucose to feed the cell. By the way, these little things inside the cell, these little organelles, they're called mitochondria right here. These are the furnaces inside your cell. That's what makes the energy. So when the glucose comes in, it's kind of burnt up here to give you energy so that you don't die, basically. But as you see, this cell has something called a membrane around it. It can't just penetrate. That's the thing with glucose. It doesn't just go in without asking for permission. It can't just go through the door, so to speak. There has to be a way to go inside the cell, and I'm going to illustrate that as a door. So the cells have these little openings through which the glucose can go inside. But usually the openings are not open like this, they're closed. So somehow those doors have to be opened. And the one little thing that opens the door is that hormone produced by the pancreas, which is called, very good. So I'm going to illustrate it as this little stick man, because basically what the little stick man does is open the door, grab the glucose, put it inside the cell. See, just like that. That's the job of insulin. Okay, so far so good? So far so good. So glucose has to go in to feed your cells, but there's a door. The door has to be open. Somebody has to open it, and that's insulin's job. Okay, everything should work out perfect, but sometimes it doesn't. So our little man is sad, and it can't open the door. The door is locked. Why? Here's the reason why sometimes this little guy cannot open the door. When we consume a high-fat diet or a high-calorie diet, we usually tend to gain weight. And so we have more fat cells in our body. Whether it comes from our diet, I can be a slim person and consume a high-fat diet, or I can be, overweight or obese. And in both cases, there's excess fat cells in our body. And what happens is these fat cells start to accumulate, not just in the adipose tissue that is so bothersome, right? When we look at ourselves in the mirror and we see all this extra fat, we hate it. But that's not the only part where fat is stored. Fat is also stored inside muscle cells, inside liver cells, and inside the pancreas cells, pancreatic cells as well. And when it comes to the muscle cells, What happens with the extra fat, which by the way has a technical name, if you want to look it up, Google it and confirm what I'm talking about. They're called intramyocellular lipids. Sounds very technical, right? Intramyocellular lipids means fat lipid inside of your cells, particularly your muscle cells. So this fat has a technical name, intramyocellular lipid. Well, unfortunately, what happens with the fat that, again, comes either from our diet or from excess fat in our body, what happens is once they start accumulating inside the cell, they block the door. Did you hear that? Fat, additional fat, extra fat within our cells, which can come from our diet or from our tissue, body extra fat tissue, blocks the door. So here comes little guy, which is insulin, try to open the door is locked, cannot open the door. So then, of course, since the insulin cannot open the door, what happens to the glucose was supposed to go inside? Well, it doesn't go inside, and it starts to accumulate outside of the cell, which means what exactly? It means you go in the morning and you prick your finger, you get one little drop of blood and you put it in the glucometer, oops, and it's supposed to be maybe 80 and it's 110 or 150. It's too high and you have either pre-diabetes or maybe even full-blown diabetes because the glucose is not able to go inside of the cell as it's supposed to, and you have excess glucose. Now, what happens when this is not right? This is wrong. This is not normal. So here comes little Mr. Pancreas, who is in charge of making insulin, and pancreas says, whoa, this is wrong over here. There's way too much glucose over here in the blood. I got to do something. So what can pancreas do to solve this problem, to help anyway? Make more, right? That's the only thing it can do. That's its job. So let's send another little guy, see if he can open the door. Send 2, or maybe 3, or maybe 4 more little guys. You see, your pancreas, when this is happening right here, is trying to help by making more what? Additional insulin. You're making more than you need, not less, but more. And sometimes you can force your way in and get some of this glucose inside by just pure, force, basically, is what's going on. It's being forced to go in. But there's still a problem here. Even if you were to get all this glucose inside and all of a sudden your blood glucose in the morning looked somewhat normal, there's still something wrong. Your pancreas is making too much insulin. There's still this additional fat here that's not letting the glucose in as it should. Now, this right here, this situation that I'm describing here has a technical name, and I've already mentioned it today. The name for this right here is insulin what? Yes. Very good students. Some of you guys have know this by heart because you've been there a few times. So insulin resistance is this situation that's happening right here. Even if your glucose does get in the cell because it's being forced by additional insulin, that doesn't mean everything is all right. You see what I'm saying? You can actually prick your finger in the morning and your insulin and your blood glucose might not even qualify as diabetes or even pre-diabetes. Your blood glucose might qualify as normal, quote unquote, normal, but you still have insulin resistance. You see what I'm saying? Why? Because your pancreas, which by the way, here's a nice little illustration of your pancreas. Your pancreas is working extra hard to make that happen, to make the blood glucose come down, because that's what the body always tries to do when something is wrong. It tries to fix the problem. So, insulin resistance happens before you're diagnosed with pre-diabetes or diabetes. You can have insulin resistance many years before you're actually diagnosed as diabetic or pre-diabetic even. Let me show you this in a different way. Here's a table, It comes directly from a book called Goodbye Diabetes by Dr. Wes Youngberg. It's a great book if you want to read it. I like this table because it gives us additional information that is not easy to find anywhere else. And the additional information that he gives us, well, first of all, he tells us how much, our blood glucose will be if we have diabetes. So if you get up in the morning, no breakfast, you measure your blood glucose, and it's more than 126, and you repeat that several times just to make sure it wasn't an error, it's diabetes. You have diabetes. Bad news. If your blood glucose is more than 100, though, but let's say it's less than 126, but more than 100, you have prediabetes. Now, he divides it into two, prediabetes and then advanced prediabetes, more than 110 fasting blood glucose. So you're basically almost there at that point. I mean, it's very arbitrary that they chose 126, probably because the risk of complications goes up so much after 126. But if you have 125 or 124, well, I mean, there's not that much difference. There's really not that much difference. But what Dr. Youngberg gives us is something a little additional. And we have stage 1 and stage two, high blood sugar. And the reason why he added these two additional columns is because when he worked in Guam, does anybody know where Guam is? An island, right? Well, it's a territory of the United States. If it was like an independent country, it would probably have the highest diabetes rates in the world, maybe even. It's sky-high diabetes. And so he was called in by the government to try to help bring down diabetes in that place. And he noticed after years of working there with many people that there were people who didn't qualify as diabetic or pre-diabetic, but still suffering from the complications of high blood sugar before they were pre-diabetic, before they were diabetic. And yet they still had complications. How so? Why is that? Well, because right here, blood sugar is higher than optimal. So if everything was working perfectly fine, and little stick guy was able to open the door with no problem and get that glucose in without any problem, your blood sugar would be optimal. But once it goes up higher than optimal, there's something going on. And so over here, if you get up in the morning, no breakfast, take your blood sugar, and it's 90, it's above optimal. And it might indicate that there's some insulin resistance going on here. And it might put you at high risk for some complications, even without being diabetic. And I will list some of those complications so you know. By the same people, by the way, Wes Youngberg, he gives us another version of this same table that's much more advanced. It has the severe diabetes. It gives us what the fasting blood glucose for severe diabetes or advanced diabetes is. If you're above 300, man, you can go to the hospital because you're in trouble over here. But it also gives us the A1C. Does anyone know what A1C is, that measure? So it's a long-term measure of your blood glucose control. So it doesn't tell you how much your blood glucose is right now. It tells you how much it has been for the last 3 months. So it's a really good picture of the long-term glucose control, so A1C. So basically it gives us, the references. If you have more than 5.7, you're pre-diabetic. But if you have more than 5.4, well, that's above optimal. You want to be optimal. And again, for diabetes, of course, if it's more than 6.5, and look at here, heart attack risk. So here's one of the complications. None if you're optimal. Once you go above optimal, then you start having some risk. Risk is no longer zero, you see? Once you have a little bit of insulin resistance, your risk starts going up. Once you get to prediabetes, it's substantial. You're not even diabetic yet, and you already have quite a bit of risk for a heart attack. And of course, once you get to the diabetes, then it's very, very high risk. That's one of the main complications of blood glucose problems. But it doesn't have to be that you have diabetes. You can have this way before. It could take years to actually develop the diabetes. But you want to catch it and not get to this, right? Right? Do you agree? Anybody? You don't want to get to here. Once you're here, you have increased heart attack, heart disease risk, kidney failure, blindness, amputation. You don't want to get here. And now, if you are here, though, the good news is that you can walk yourself back. That would be great, right? Now, here's some of the other complications of insulin resistance. These are not necessarily happening at the same time as diabetes or even prediabetes. They can happen before. Weight gain. We know that weight gain itself is because of insulin resistance, since you're making more insulin. Insulin is a hormone that actually facilitates fat storage. So if you're producing too much insulin, it's much easier to gain weight, unfortunately. Okay, so that's one. Second one, high blood pressure. You can have high blood pressure because of the insulin resistance without having the diabetes. Also, it lowers your good cholesterol and it increases your bad cholesterol. It increases your triglycerides. So there's all kinds of alterations in your blood lipids. Your blood lipids are going the wrong way. It sometimes causes those up and downs in sugar levels. So sometimes you can have hypoglycemia. Does anyone know what that is? Hypoglycemia, when your sugar is too low and you start feeling jittery and sweaty. Too low, that's bad. That's really, actually, low blood sugar is more dangerous than high blood sugar. People can faint while driving. That has happened. So it's very dangerous. Fatty liver is another one that could be, in fact, related to insulin resistance. And as we mentioned, it increases risk for heart attacks, stroke, and we already said Alzheimer's is type 3 diabetes. Many cancers are related to diabetes. Breast cancer in women is related to diabetes, and many other cancers are related to high blood glucose. So what I want to talk about, though, with the insulin resistance is that dispel some myths about it, because many times we tend to think that diabetes comes from eating too much sugar. Has anybody ever heard that argument before? Too much sugar will cause diabetes. Well, what happens is not necessarily is the high sugar in the diet. In fact, way back in the 1920s, this study was published, and this doctor, Dr. Shirley Sweeney, did a test and put healthy people to eat either a high-fat diet or a high-carbohydrate diet. Which one do you think will increase your blood sugars more, high-fat or high-carbohydrate? Let's look at the chart. C stands for carbohydrate. Fat stands for fat, or F stands for fat. Which one actually did produce a higher blood sugar level in healthy people? In healthy people, not in diabetics. Once you're diabetic, of course, you eat too many carbs, it's gonna make your blood sugar go up high. But if you're healthy, which one actually increases your blood sugar more? The fat. Why? Because fat produces insulin resistance, whether it comes from the diet or from our body. Again, they repeated studies like this. This has been done through the years, the decades, last few decades. Here's another study where they actually gave people different diets. So you have a low carb, high fat, and then they increase the carbs a little bit more, and they decrease the fat a little bit more, keeping the calories exactly the same. This is not a calorie difference. This is a carb and fat difference. Proteins were kept exactly the same. The only thing that changed was the carbs and the fat. So here we go. High fat, low carb. Look at what it did to the blood sugar level. You see here? Blood sugar level way higher. How is that possible? Haven't we been always told that it's the carbs that increase your blood sugar? Well, it is once you have insulin resistance. You see what I'm saying? Once you have the insulin resistance, the sugar can no longer go in. So it does make your sugar go up high. But if you're healthy, you can actually tell what is causing that insulin resistance in the first place, and it's the higher fat diet. Is that interesting? Have you ever heard anyone this concept before? It's new for some of you? Yeah. You've heard it? Some of people have it. It's getting there. So insulin resistance comes again from either consuming or accumulating excess energy in our cells. And the second thing is that if you're not actually burning that extra energy, it tends to accumulate even more. So we can have a marathon runner who eats, 5,000, 10,000 calories a day, but he's also running 15 miles a day. He probably will not get insulin resistance. You see what I'm saying here? Because it's also a problem of not burning enough of that excess energy, okay? So those are the main two things going on. Excess fat, whether it comes from the diet or the actual storage in the body, and also not burning that extra fat. Now, let me talk about prediabetes real quick. I'll just give you some statistics. Here we go. Half of adults above the age of 40. Anyone above the age of 40? just checking. Half of us have prediabetes. Whether we know it or not, most people don't. But most people are not diagnosed. After the age of 60, the amount goes up to 2/3 of adults have prediabetes. And after the age of 74, it's 3/4 of individuals have prediabetes. Most of them have no clue. Because if they don't feel, any symptoms, they might not ever get checked. With diabetes itself, here's the International Diabetes Federation Atlas giving us the statistics. 463 million people today live with diabetes, but they're projecting an increase of 51% in the world in the next few years, and they break it up into different continents. We're already sky high in North America, but still going up 33%. Europe is high already, going up 15%. But look at this, Africa, 143% increase. Here's a population that is more vulnerable because they don't have a lot of diabetes now, so there's more people who are going to get it. That's the bad news. Same with Southeast Asia and other places, Middle East and stuff. So it's going up. That's the bad news right there. Sorry about that, but it is going up. Now, for me, as a nutritionist who worked right here at Salud para la Gente, this is the really sad part for me, okay? This is the really sad part because I worked with a lot of children. So the statistics say that this generation of children and young people who have been born after the year 2000, so I guess the millennials, would that be millennials? Yeah. So these millennial kids, they're going to get diabetes, 1 out of 3. So out of 3 kids today, our children and grandchildren, 1/3 of them will be diabetic. But that's the general population. Among Hispanics and African Americans is half of them. Half of them will be diabetic. Unless we do something now, quick. Because children keep on eating every day that junk food, right? They keep on doing it. So unless we do something quick to change the situation, they will grow up to be diabetic. If they're not diabetic already. Because like I said, I saw children with diabetes. I saw children with high cholesterol, little kids. Literally 3 feet tall, high cholesterol. 7-year-olds who were hypertensive. That didn't happen when I was a kid. I don't know about you, but it happens now. It's happening to our kids because they've been raised eating different than we did. I mean, I don't know about you, but I didn't eat junk food all the time. It was like a one, maybe once a year, my parents took me to eat a burger. Once a year. We got sodas just for birthdays. I remember the glass bottles, 1 little bottle, and we had to take it back, the bottle. Remember that? Yeah, we got sodas for birthdays. We didn't drink soda every day. That was not a thing at all. But our kids, it is a thing for them, many of them, unfortunately. So this is what's going on. Okay, so let's go back to the risk factors. Number 1, overweight and obesity is the greatest factor because the additional fat stored in the body produces additional fat stored inside the cells, which will produce then insulin resistance. And it doesn't just happen to people who are overweight or obese. Again, we can have healthy. So here's a person who started off, with overweight or obese and then lost weight, either a healthy way or an unhealthy way. If you lose weight the healthy way, you will have enough muscle and not a lot of fat. But there's some people who have normal weight, normal BMI, who have excess what? What's this yellow thing over here? Yeah, you can have normal BMI and be obese. You still be obese. How's that possible? Excess fat, not enough muscle. We'll talk about this in the third session more. But it's not just happening to people who are necessarily overweight or obese. We can have normal BMI and still have excess fat in our body, okay? Number 2, risk factor, that rich diet, the rich Western diet. I was going to say American, but actually it's everywhere now. It's all over. You know the country who has the highest rate of diabetes right now? It's not even the United States. It's Mexico. Mexico has more diabetes than the United States. And so it's not just American. It's all over the place. This diet has been globalized. Okay, so the rich diet, too much fat, too much sugar, too much salt, and not enough fiber. That's basically the components of the rich diet. Lack of exercise, like we said before, so we'll talk about that in particular in a upcoming program, and we'll talk about exactly what kinds of exercise are best for diabetics. So what kind of exercise helps diabetics the best? We'll talk about that in an upcoming session, okay? Now, what about this? Has anybody ever heard this argument? Well, I got diabetes because my parents have diabetes, my grandparents have diabetes, my cousins and my brother and sister. So, I got it because I inherited, it's genetics. Ever heard of that? Yes, of course. A lot of people say that. And it's partly true in the sense that you can, through your genes, so to speak, get a predisposition to become diabetic. So my dad was diabetic. He had way out of control diabetes, way out of control. He was in a diabetic coma more than once. His blood sugars go up into the 400 to 600 range. I don't know how he didn't die. He didn't, though. I mean, he did eventually. My dad passed away 20 years ago. Way young than he should have. He was only 64. But his blood sugars will go down into the 30s. I mean, that's the range. Way out of control. So do I have a higher risk for diabetes since I'm his daughter? It's, direct relationship, family relationship? Yes, the answer is yes. But that doesn't have to be so, because the genetic part is actually a very small component. The lifestyle risk is much higher than 60%, whereas genetic, maybe 10 to 15% of the risk come from genes, okay? Now, this is more illustrated with the following example, which is ethnic origin. So people from certain ethnic groups have higher risk for diabetes. Does anybody know which ethnic group in the United States has the highest? Like those of you who know, I know you know because you've been here. Don't say it. Which ethnic group in the United States has the highest diabetes? Good guess. Good guess, African Americans, but it's not African Americans. There's actually a tribe of Native Americans, and they have the highest rate of diabetes in the United States, and it's called the Pima Indians. Anybody heard of Pima Indians? They live down in Arizona mostly. Well, the story goes like this. It turns out the Pima Indians were a larger group many hundreds of years ago, like 600 or 700 years ago, I think. They were a large group, and they split into two. And so one half maybe, of the group settled south of the border. What's south of the border? Mexico. And they settled in a place called Chihuahua. Anybody know where Chihuahua is? Northern Mexico. And the other half stayed in the northern part, and they became the Pima Indians we know today. And they have the highest rate of diabetes in the country. Their cousins down in the south, does anybody know who they are? They settled in the mountains of Chihuahua, and they're called the Tarahumara Indians. Anybody ever heard of the Tarahumara Indians? Tarahumara. You know what they're famous? Maybe if you're not a runner, you've never heard of Tarahumara Indians. But if you are a runner, especially a long-distance runner, you might have heard of them because they are long-distance runners. In fact, they compete in like 100-mile races, and they get in the first 10 places. In fact, the women run too. So they're very active people, and as I showed before, they live in the mountains, so they are very active physically. And the second thing about them is that they consume a much simpler diet than their cousins to the north. They eat mostly corn, beans, veggies, chia seeds. They're famous for chia seeds. They eat a very simple, they're very low income, low wages they're very simple people. They're indigenous. They don't get the McDonald's every day. They probably don't drink Coca-Cola or Starbucks every day. It's a very simple diet. And guess what? They have some of the lowest rates of diabetes in the world. So the question is it their genes that actually is more important, or what? It's the lifestyle that makes the big difference. And of course, they're very, very active. So that's why their lifestyle has made a big difference. And they have some of the lowest diabetes rates in the world. Good to know, right? Good to know. Okay, now let me tell you about some of the complications that I mentioned before. If you have diabetes, prediabetes, or insulin resistance, this applies to us. Okay, so here we go. Diabetes, first of all, ages your body way fast. All that extra glucose going around your blood and your, basically all your organs is damaging those organs. But mostly that cardiovascular system puts you at a very, very high risk for the most common complication, which is heart disease. So if you have prediabetes, your risk of a heart attack goes up by 50%, just with prediabetes. If you have actually diagnosed diabetes, your risk for a heart attack goes up by almost 400% in some individuals. So your risk for a heart attack is really high. But not just heart attacks, also strokes is the same problem. Heart attacks and strokes have the common, characteristic that there's atherosclerosis in the arteries. The arteries are clogged. So whether it's in the heart or the brain is the same basic problem. And so diabetics have a higher risk for this. And once it clogs 100%, if the artery is in the brain, it's a stroke. If it's in the heart, it's a heart attack. And that's why over 70% of adults with type 2 diabetes will die of one of these two causes. So one of the main cause of death will be one of the two, but the underlying cause is actually the diabetes, and actually it's the insulin resistance. So of course, the other very important complication that we need to be aware of is renal failure. So as you probably know, the number one cause of people getting dialysis in the United States is diabetes. Number two is high blood pressure, which are related anyway. The other thing is, of course, vision problems. I got to meet a lady right here in Watsonville several years ago, a lady from my church, or not from my church, but from a church I know. She called me up and said, "Can you come and visit my neighbor?" And we went to visit her neighbor. She was a 40-year-old woman. And when I went into her house, I realized, boy, this lady has children and grandchildren, but the house looked unkept. And then I realized, we sat down to talk to her. She could not see us. She was blind. 40-year-old blind woman because of her diabetes. Number one cause of blindness in adulthood is diabetes. And of course, there's the weakened immune system. So as you know, diabetes is one of the underlying causes of severe COVID-19. Did you know that? Diabetes is one of the underlying causes that can get you to the hospital if you get COVID. The reason why is because your immune system is weak. That's why diabetics, they get, a sore or some kind of cut, and it doesn't necessarily heal as fast as other people. We tell diabetics, when we work at the clinics, we tell diabetics not to walk barefoot at home at all, because they can step on something, a piece of glass, a nail, and they don't feel it because they're numb. The toes and the feet and the hands and the fingers become numb because of the nerves endings are damaged, so they don't feel, and they can step on something and be bleeding and get it all infected, and then it's really, really hard to get over that. The infection can last for weeks, and if it doesn't get controlled, of course, we get sometimes, unfortunately, gangrene, and that will lead to amputations. Wow. So many bad news. I don't mean to give you so many bad news. Here's the good news. The good news is that research has shown this is reversible. This is reversible. Prediabetes is 100% reversible, 100%. And type 2 diabetes is reversible in most cases, in the great majority of cases. Now, I put this stuff all the time on the internet, I put videos and stuff, and people complain to me that I say that diabetes is reversible, type 2. And they go, no, no, no. In fact, one time I was doing a class right here in Watsonville at Salud para la Gente. I would do classes like this with the patients in Salud. And one time, one of the doctors, a lady doctor from Salud para la Gente, she's, can I help you do the class? I'm like, sure. So she did the first class. So first she, said hi to everybody. She did a little intro. And then she said, all of you are diabetics? And they're like, yeah, they're all diabetics. They were mostly her patients. And she's like, well, let me tell you what, diabetes is a chronic disease. So you'll have it for the rest of your life. You'll always be diabetic. And number two, if you're not using insulin, you will, because all diabetics eventually have to use insulin. That's what she said to them. She's a medical doctor. Now, I don't blame her. Doctors are busy, and sometimes they can't always keep up with the latest research. And that's how they're trained, most of them. So depending on the age, especially if doctors were trained 20 years ago, that's what they learned in school. That's what they learned in medical school, that diabetes is irreversible, that is a chronic disease. The latest research shows us that not so. In fact, here's a paper from the American Diabetes Association. So this is a consensus paper from the American Diabetes Association that says, how do we define cure? I didn't put that word there. They did. They put the word cure right there in the title. How do we define cure of diabetes? And they're talking about type 2. And they give us a little table in this research study that gives us definitions. So they say partial remission, complete remission, prolonged remission, depending on the amount of time. But what you see here is that the person achieves normal diabetes, normal glucose levels without medication, right here, without medication, at least 1 year. And that will basically fall under the American Diabetic Association's definition of cured. Is that interesting or what? So they're saying it, not me. So, I tell that to people because people are like, why are you saying that diabetes is reversible? Well, it is. That's what the American Diabetes Association is saying. I'm not saying it. Go tell them if you don't agree. You know what I mean? Go fight them. Don't tell me. I'm just using telling what they're saying here. They're using the word remission. They're using the word cure. We use the word reversal. Same thing, right? Same thing. So you could achieve this. Now, there's healthy ways to do it, and there's less healthy, not unhealthy, but less, well, there's some unhealthy ways to do it too. But I'll show you here what I consider to be the healthiest way to reverse the diabetes. Even if you just lose weight, you can get, an operation, a bariatric surgery, and people lose hundreds of pounds. Sometimes they're able to reverse the diabetes just with the weight loss. But there's, maybe safer in ways to do it, not necessarily having to go through a very, complicated surgery or high-risk surgery. There's other ways to do it. But basically, the point is the following. If you want to control or hopefully even reverse diabetes or prediabetes or insulin resistance, well, we have to go to the root cause, and the root cause is insulin resistance. Okay, so the way to reverse diabetes, here's the most important point of the whole night. The way to reverse diabetes and prediabetes is to get rid of the root cause. Get rid of the root cause. It's the cause and effect relationship. Yeah? Good point? Yeah? Agree? Okay, now let me tell you something. People have been doing this for a long time. There's a place here in California, up in the foothills, called WEMAR Institute. And they have a program called New Start. Each one of the letters stands for a lifestyle practice that they incorporate into this program. So it's an 18-day inpatient program that you can go to WEMAR and you can do it. And they'll give you doctors, nutritionists, they'll take you out for walks, they'll feed you. It's not cheap, but you get to stay there for 18 days. And they have been keeping some of the statistics. So people who go through the 18-day program, At the end of the 18 days, if they have diabetes, their chances of being normal glucose without the use of medication, in other words, their chances of reversing their diabetes, 50% of them. 50% of diabetics, after 18 days, have reversed it. That's amazing to me. Now, after the 18 days, you get to go home. That's the tough part, because once you go home, you have to follow the program on your own. Nobody's feeding you anymore. You have to do it. Nobody's taking you out for walks and holding your hand. You have to do it, right? So it's easier when you're in this setting. Once you go home, the tough part starts. But if you do it, if you're motivated enough to continue the program, exercise and the food and everything else, by the 90-day mark, when they follow up, some of these people, they do follow-ups, over 90% of them have reversed their diabetes by 90 days. So it's reversible in most cases. Now, Dr. Neil Barnard, you don't have to spend $6,000, by the way. You can just buy a book, $15 or $10 on Amazon. You can buy a book, Dr. Neil Barnard's program for reversing diabetes. It's basically based on the same principles. And you can read some of the research he has done. He's taken groups of patients and put them either on the diet that we're going to talk about in this program, or the American Diabetes Association program, and he's found out that people can reverse their diabetes, not necessarily following the American Diabetic Association program, but the program we're going to talk about in these meetings, okay? You can also get the same through, this other book, 30-Day Diabetes Miracle. That's another, based on the same principles. My favorite one is this one, The End of Diabetes by Dr. Joe Furman. Very well written. He's very compelling. He's just a good writer, and he gives you all the references. If you want to make sure this is all scientifically solid, you can check the references, and it's a great book. Now, because of all of these books are in English, I wrote one in Spanish. So apologies if I don't have an English version, but the reason why is because all of these other books are in English. So I wrote it in Spanish because there's no book in Spanish. So I have the book in Spanish with all the references as well, in an online course that you can take with 6 hours of teaching and food demos and all that online as well. Now, here's what I want to finish with. How come you haven't heard this more? Why isn't this more widely known? Well, first of all, it's a lifestyle program. Not everybody likes to change their lifestyle. It's not necessarily easy to change one's diet or start exercising more. It's easier to go to the doctor. Doctor will say, take this pill, and you take the pill. Not that much effort, right? Just take the pill. Unfortunately, that doesn't reverse your diabetes. It doesn't make you feel a lot better necessarily. Your diabetes can continue to progress. Whereas if you reverse the diabetes, you'll probably feel a lot better, and then you'll get other good side effects from that. But here's some of the more specific reasons why you haven't probably heard this before. Number one, scientific research trickles down into medical practice very slowly. Like I told you before, the anecdote I had with my friend doctor at Salud para la Gente is probably due to this. The fact that, she's a busy doctor. She, in fact, in Salud para la Gente, unfortunately, doctor, and I know in other places too, PAMF and other places, I know doctors are pressured to see sometimes 20 patients, sometimes 30 patients a day. They're busy people. It's all about the money, right? You got to see more people to make more income, to bring in more money for the corporations. That's the sad reality of medical practice today. So these doctors don't always have the time to keep up with the latest information, especially in regards to nutrition, because when they went to medical school, they didn't get any nutrition. Most doctors don't get nutrition at all in medical school. The very small percentage who do, it's very basic nutrition, not necessarily how to reverse diseases, just what are vitamins and what are proteins, that kind of basic information. Most doctors don't have good training on nutrition. Now, that's starting to change. There's some initiatives that people are starting to try to incorporate that into medical training, but it hasn't quite been realized yet. So we're still in this situation where doctors are just not trained in nutrition. Number two, doctors think patients won't follow it. It takes time. So you were going to do about 6 sessions. Doctors don't have 6 hours to sit with you. That's just not it's just not reality. They don't have that kind of time. So the amount of time they have to convince you to make changes in your diet and your exercise routine is very small. They hardly have the time. And most doctors don't think that patients will follow the recommendations once they're told. Now, unfortunately, I think there's a little bit of underestimation of what actually patients are willing to do. I think some patients, if they were given the chance or they were given the choice between pills or lifestyle and diet, some of them might say, I don't want the pills. I'd rather avoid the pills. Some patients might say that. But, this is the world we live in. And the third reason why I think you don't know a lot about this more is because the medical journals that those doctors are reading are mostly sponsored by pharmaceutical companies. That's the sad reality we live in too. These pharmaceutical companies do not have any interest in you learning how to eat better. They're not making any money if you stop taking their drugs, right? That's just the sad reality. Once you stop taking the metformin or using the insulin, they're not making an income anymore. It's not profitable. This, what we're doing here, is free. Nobody's getting rich off of this, right? Nobody, literally, no one. But if you take the metformin and you take the insulin, you take all these other medications, yeah, some people are getting rich off of that. That's just the reality, okay? So that's why we do it. We do it as a service to you guys. Hopefully you will share this information. This is kind of what we hope. Whatever you will learn, and you will also share with others so other people can know that you don't have to go necessarily through all of that other path of just taking the medications and your disease getting worse. There's actually another option. The other option is improve your lifestyle, your diet, feel better, lose weight, feel healthier and younger, and get all the other side effects, like maybe lowering your cholesterol or your blood pressure, things like that. Those are good side effects, right? Anyway, so next session we're going to be talking very specifically about food. We're gonna put the most important thing first, because this is what we do the most. So we're going to talk about food next time. Which foods actually help reverse diabetes? Next, after that, we'll talk about exercise. In fact, if you've been here through this program before, I have to tell you, I have upgraded the program. And there's one session that is brand new, where we're going to talk about the effects of lack of sleep, of stress, and especially intermittent fasting. We're going to talk about all those things related to diabetes and pre-diabetes. So you don't want to miss that one. It's a brand new lecture. But here's again my website. So it's over here, en español, saludparahoy.com. And of course from there you can access my YouTube channel, Instagram, things like that. And there's a whole section of diabetes in my Spanish website. And if you are on Facebook and Instagram, here's also, this other information as well.